Welcome, Leo, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 23rd of February for the Ascendant, the Sun, or the Moon. I'm going to share with you the big themes of the week to begin with, then the event chart on screen. I'll unpack that. That always provides an influential backdrop for the whole week, even though it is early on Monday. I'll then go through each of those influences frame by frame to give you a clear picture of what you can expect around relationships, finance, energy, and work. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundel. A very warm welcome. If you've yet to subscribe to my channel, please do so now and help it to continue to thrive. This week, we're going to see a quarter moon on Tuesday. They get very little coverage, particularly on YouTube, but quarter moons are highly important, provide an energy for one whole week. And it's when the sun, your ruler, and the moon are at right angles. And because they have very different energies, that can create tension. And the quarter moon on Tuesday is in the chatty sign of Gemini, which can be very friendly, but you've got a gathering of energy, including the sun, in the much more intense, psychological, and what can be a little bit possessive or controlling eighth house. So if there is a friend, or there is an energy in a romantic type where you feel a bit limited in terms of your connections to others, that could show up from that quarter moon. But on Thursday, Mercury goes into the first retrograde of the year. It's going to have all its retrogrades this year in water signs. And that means for you, that's particularly significant from a psychological dimension because the retrograde goes on to the 20th of March. But the eighth house can be where we're transforming. It can be where we're in some ways rejuvenating ourselves, but it can be also where things are being deconstructed because it's a very plutonic energy, the eighth house. Now, Mars, the planet of passion, is going to move into that eighth house to amp up that passion on the 2nd of March. But that Mercury retrograde suggests you're going to be thinking, Mercury, about some deep strands in your situation through to the 20th of March when it goes direct. But the eighth house can also be about money, shared resources, and business. So Mercury, very much to do with precision and communication, will need care because the water sign Pisces is not Mercury's best location. And it's something we all have to work at. But I'm going to share with you some of the opportunities of Mercury retrograde too. So on the screen at the start of the week, what caught my eye for you personally is that Chiron, the so-called wounded healer, is the most northerly player. And Chiron has been in Aries 4 times since February 2019, which for you is about knowledge. Chiron can flag up our weaknesses, but it can also amplify our superpower. So if you're someone who does train or support people and give them a lot of encouragement, Chiron will have helped that role over these last recent years. But he is supported by Mars at the start of this week. So there may be a very positive conversation where someone tells you about the talents you have and is very supportive. But unfortunately, Mars is also in a clash with Uranus right through this week until he leaves to move into Pisces on the 2nd of March. And the inference here is that Uranus is in a very visible part of your scope. Uranus doesn't like restraint. It likes to be a free spirit. If you do a job where you can perhaps work at your own pace, maybe work from home, you do something that's quite unusual, it's maybe something progressive, then that square with Mars just suggests that someone you connect with this week may in some ways resent that freedom loving or unique part of your nature that you're demonstrating to the world at large, that 10th house. Now, it may be around a relationship, to be honest. Maybe it's going to be a battle of worlds because this part of your chart the Pisces energy is very much about evolution. If something needs to evolve and you're open to that, but someone you're connected to is resisting that, that can create some tension. And that brings us to the quarter moon, which occurs on Tuesday. But just before I share that with you, just to say that Jupiter has been the planet of knowledge, has been in a psychological area since May last year, but actually is in a very strong link with Venus right at the start of this week. You could have a reassuring conversation early on Monday, but later on in the day, the moon moves towards Uranus but squares off with Mars. So that potential for some kind of uh, energy to come between you and someone you want or need to collaborate with. And maybe it is because, from your viewpoint, you feel that you're leaning into their needs, but they, in some ways, don't want to recognize your right to do what you want in a more independent and freedom loving way. So, a bit of politics is possible, but there still could be a deep but powerful conversation on Monday, which is very helpful. But by Tuesday, we have that quarter moon. So the moon moves forwards into Gemini, which can be very friendly. It's very social. If you're someone who is interacting in a group environment and there is some politics going on, I think it could be a bit of a turn off for you this week, to be honest. And maybe because of Uranus being very close initially to the moon later on Monday and that square with Mars. So you could put a boundary in and say, look, I don't want to do this, because the quarter moon can make you more conscious of what feels heavy, possessive, or where someone's using some leverage in some kind of way. You won't like that. And part of the reason perhaps you're going to be more conscious of your higher values is Saturn and Neptune having come into that conjunction last week. And of course, in Saturn's case for 2 years, and Neptune's case for 12 years, they're going to be occupying the part of your scope to do with your philosophies, which can be expanded. So there's deep transformational energy going on, the potential for boundaries, tension, friction. But then on Thursday, Mercury going retrograde. If you are entrepreneur or you're wanting to do something with your long-term resources, particularly around things like pensions, savings, investments, legacies, inheritances, wills, all of those things, because Mercury can be how we think, but also how we articulate our ideas. The retrograde through to the 20th of April may see you changing your mind about something around those areas. But equally, it could be nothing to do with finance, business, shared resources, partnership, money. It could be more to do with the psychological domain, because the eighth house can be where we're most invested emotionally and spiritually, not just financially, but it can also be romantically too. So the 11th house energy of that quarter moon could flag up also if you're not quite sure, particularly with Mercury going retrograde and the tension of Mars and Uranus, whether you do want to be in the same romantic relationship for the long term. Will you make a binding decision this week? I'm not sure you will, but I think you can become more conscious of where you're not quite connecting in a soulful way, which is important. Because although you're a fire sign and can be very regal, very charismatic, the energies of Pisces are about letting go a little bit of that and being more conscious of what needs to evolve. And in some ways, that can become more about understanding our vulnerabilities, but being comfortable with being in touch with them. But by the end of this week, the Sun moves forwards and connects with the North Node, and the retreating Mercury meets with the advancing Venus. If you are discussing some financial issues, one of the things I would say, for example, if it is a contract, you could get a good result. And there are some people who won't do anything with Mercury retrograde. They won't even have a meeting with me online, potential client. I have had that before. Um, Certainly it's important if we're traveling anywhere, we're looking at documents, anything of a legal nature, to be very mindful of the detail, particularly with Saturn in that ninth house and the mistiness of Neptune there too. but it can be when we have opportunities. So if you're wanting to squeeze more from your resources or work collaboratively with someone in a way where you both feel comfortable, remember this can be a time of rebirth as well as some things come into a close. So see that Mercury retrograde as an opportunity for positivity as well as the potential glitches we know it can for us all create. And just also know the sun's linked to the North Node will just give you a prompt to really trust your instincts, whether it is around an intimate relationship, whether it's around your long-term finances and the decisions you make. It is unlikely to fail you, Leo. Discover what March holds in store for you by clicking on your March deep dive video on the screen. Also, on the second screen gives you the opportunity to join me at my new website. There's lots of exciting information. It's not generic like a lot of horoscope sites are. It's all written very much from the heart, and it would be great to have your company. And if you've yet to order your personal horoscope forecast and life roadmap combination at 50% off, if you get the Natal version, please apply Astro 26 at the checkout and you'll get that 50% off. If you'd like to understand your soul or karmic version, the draconic option, please add at the checkout Draco 26.